My name is Keenan Taylor. I'm a scientific illustrator and fantasy author. I've been extremely busy between writing the next Tales of Kaimere anthology, commissions, videos, and drawing an 8-foot map of the known world, but a new Paleo documentary came out that I watched as I worked on said map, and I wanted to take some time to share my thoughts. I'll be painting in broad strokes, but if you're worried about spoilers, might want to sit this one out. I'm not going to censor my thoughts, but I respect if you want to go in with a clean slate. My first impressions were generally positive. I think it could do a lot of good legwork in educating the general public on fundamental broad strokes educations of evolution, the magnitude of time, and the importance of context in success of a given species. I anticipate this series is going to be very beneficial in general understanding of natural history. There are some tropes I find troubling, but thankfully they are largely confined to the first episode. The music ranges from acceptable to excellent. A highlight was the music for the Arthur Plura segment, which I would generally say is the show at its strongest, also having very strong visual composition and effects. Unsurprisingly, Morgan Freeman is an engaging and entertaining host in the Guide Through Time. I would not be surprised if life on our planet has a much wider reach than a lot of other documentaries on the subject, as it has major names, is on a major platform, and is very well publicized, and is executed in an inviting fashion. A person with minimal education on the subject, or perhaps hasn't studied biology or deep time since they were a kid, is going to have a comprehensive and largely accurate understanding, and I think that's pretty awesome. There's a lot of subjects which have never really hooked my passion, yet have held a passing interest, and I imagine someone with that perspective on natural history is going to watch this and not get lost in the weeds while still understanding what's happening and have a good time. It is not as paleo-focused as I imagine a lot of us wanted, but I feel live footage did a good job of evoking things. Unfortunately, I don't think it did a good job to make it clear that this was footage intended as an analog. A viewer without much education in natural history could be forgiven for leaving this series thinking that great gray owls and ostriches evolved immediately after the Mesozoic. If people leave thinking jellyfish are literally unchanged since the Cambrian, again, not ideal, but I suppose that's not the end of the world. Something this live footage could be argued to lend itself toward is impressing upon viewers how a lot of modern clades evolved from very basal ancestors extremely quickly after the mass extinction at the end of the Cretaceous. Bats, for example, from the early Eocene, 9 to 10 million years after impact, would take an experienced eye to notice differences from modern taxa, and I think that's pretty incredible. It underscores that morphological changes are not constant. Adaptive radiation, or rapid evolution into open niches, can be extremely fast, and once a good fit is made, animals might not change very much in many millions of years. I expected it to be largely a story of eras, but it eschewed this conventional format to instead focus on clades. While I think this was a general strength of the show, and I applaud them for trying a slightly different format, it did play into my major critique, which I'll get to in a moment. This focus also contributed to the timeline issues in using modern analogs, as I mentioned before. The natural footage, as a whole, however, was a highlight. In the marketing, this series was heavily promoting the idea that evolution works in a constant march toward supremacy through intense competition. This idea is generally fallen out of favor among paleontologists and biologists. Survival of the fittest is better understood as fitting into the context of a species' niche, not physical fitness. A species survives not by bullying lesser species, but by making the most efficient use of their situation and, ultimately, their ability to reproduce. If it can make babies, it's fit. My issue with the competition model is one I inherited from my professors, and these ideas are not my own, but they certainly make the most sense given the evidence at hand. Evidence which is also fairly scarce. The fossil record is extremely fragmentary. Even within the formation, it's a bunch of isolated, blurry snapshots, not a cohesive and clear record. To say one species outcompeted another is a very bold claim when all we have are a few partial skeletons, even if we find evidence of interaction, which is often quite wanting. The history of life seems less a story of increasing supremacy and more an ever-shifting context driving change and clade turnover. A species will specialize in a stable ecosystem, dominating because those specializations lead to success. When the context changes, these specializations become detrimental because they are specialized in a context that no longer is existing, and animals more generalized will have a much easier time adapting. If the context is plentiful, a multi-ton hadrosaur is the fittest. If the context is ash and ruin, the half-pound bird that can subsist on seeds and insects is the fittest. Everything comes down to context, and the giants of a given age only achieve their great size by the bounties of their situation. This was best exemplified in Chapter 7, showing us how the end Cretaceous mass extinction event may have been devastating, but as the world recovered, and once it did, there was a lush and bountiful habitat with no large animals. This was the perfect context for a dramatic adaptive radiation. The episode also emphasized the origins of grass arising due to increased aridity, not by beating trees at their own game, and the importance of this contextual shift in the transition of fauna. Camels didn't beat calicotheres and brontotheres by being superior animals. They were better able to digest grass and invested more in running than outmaneuvering, bulk, or defense like earlier forest herbivores often did. Zebra, wildebeest, and cheetahs of today aren't successful due to inherent betterness. They're successful in an open field because their ancestors, who were better runners, survived and reproduced. A cheetah is not a good predator in a dense forest or tundra, but they are quite well fit for the savanna. In light of all this, it was an odd juxtaposition between the marketing and the first episode emphasizing the arms race of evolution, and the meat of the show conveying a much more modern view of context being the driving force behind evolutionary success or failure. Smilodon did become the Chad apex predator of Pleistocene South America by killing all the inferior virgin terror birds. It did so because the terror birds had already gone extinct and there was a vacancy. It's worth noting that the species of Smilodon that coincided with Titanus up in North America would have been barely coming up to its ankle. A successful predator of a young terror bird by a large male gracilis is possible, but I wouldn't portray it as a regular occurrence. While the show didn't say that orcas outcompeted Megalodon, that's another one I see with quite a lot of frequency, along with tyrannosaurs outcompeting carnosaurs like Acrocanthosaurus. When you only look at a broad timeline, it's a reasonable conclusion. However, the case of orcas and Megalodon and terror birds and Smilodon offer us a reprieve in the respective records are a lot more complete than we see further back in time. We can say with greater confidence that Megalodon and terror birds were extinct or endangered respectively by the time the Pliocene concluded, and the orca and Smilodon stepped up to vacant niches as much as 1 million years later. The carnosaurs being ousted by tyrannosaurs in North America is even more ridiculous. Around 30 million years go by between the last large carnosaurs in North America and the first multi-ton tyrannosaurs. Sure, we don't have a lot of material in North America between the Albian and Cenomanian, so we're making a puzzle with very few pieces, but what we have doesn't exactly suggest that souped-up tyrants came out of nowhere and beat up their primitive predecessors. They just stepped up to a vacant niche after there was a massive context change, just as all dinosaurs did in the onset of the Jurassic, as our ancestors did in the Paleocene, and as Smilodon populator did in the absence of substantial competition in South America. The series often says one thing and then shows another, which to me suggests a lot of issues come down to executive oversight wanting to push the competition narrative, while the consultants were able to slide in the better accepted modern theories a bit under the radar. I do appreciate such lines as when Freeman states that the dinosaurs reached their heights due to the stability of their context. It gives a sense, as I understand it, to be much more reflective of reality. Giants and dominant species are reflections of the good times. They don't make the good times good. Megalodon isn't compelling to me because it's among the largest predators Earth has ever seen or could beat other predators in a fight. I find Megalodon fascinating because it speaks to a staggering productivity of Miocene oceans, that such an animal could evolve and be supported for around 20 million years. However, the misleading theme of competition and general sense of supremacy, the closer you get to us, still persists throughout the series, and that's pretty disappointing. They kept bringing up mammal intelligence and planning during segments when there wasn't much thought being shown. It's not like Myocetus was thinking, oh, if I just hold my breath for a few seconds, or the cheetah was genuinely planning points of attack or countermeasures. It wasn't some covert operation, it was just chase, instinct, and reaction. The recurring theme got pretty tired. I have no hot takes regarding the visual effects. I'm not going to lie and say the Allosaurus left me with a sense of wonder or adoration. There were a few notable standouts though, which I thought were exceptional and worthy of note, such as Arthropleura, Scutosaurus, and Didicurus. Myocetus was great, as was the Megalodon. The Brontotheres were also very well rendered, and had a very good sense of weight. The cave lions may not have had the most parsimonious designs, but I could see an argument for a lighter winter coat, and they sure were beautiful. I like to focus on the positive, so these are the creatures I'll choose to remember. There's a lot to like in life on our planet. It was a generally good overview of major events in the history of life on Earth. Starting with a representation of Luca, the last universal common ancestor, was quite humbling, and when Freeman discussed the extinction of the Ordovician as eliminating entire branches of the family tree, really did help put things in perspective, especially since the idea of the Tree of Life was so firmly established thanks to that fantastic intro. I also liked when they dabbled in speculative behaviors. Having Titanus males compete with a dance felt very plausible. Male ostriches do something similar on a smaller scale, and while roosters and other birds may fight, I think it's fair to say a predator with as much lethal potential as a terror bird would go through a lot of rituals before ever resorting to direct combat. The young Smilodon curiously interacting with Didicurus was quite charming, and I've already praised the Arthropleura. Camarasaurus has been criticized for a number of inaccuracies by people who know far more about the animal than I do, even down to the name. But man, those vibes were immaculate, and I loved the touches of algae on their shell. They felt very tangible and menacing. The plausibility and believability of Prehistoric Planet may have spoiled us regarding immersive animation, but there's a lot to like in life on our planet, and ultimately that's only part of what makes for a good documentary. I have a number of subjective problems with it, especially the dinosaur segments, and I'm sure there are people who are more informed in other areas could conjure similar frustrations on areas I overlooked, but I don't think these matter much in the broad strokes painting this series is trying to convey. As long as you give passable impressions, it's fine. As I'm sure you've picked up, my major issue comes down to leaning to misleading tropes of competition. It's something I try to keep in mind when designing the evolutionary history of my own project, Kaimere, and a topic I've thought about and discussed a great deal, so maybe that's why it stuck out to me with such negativity. There's a lot of modern Earth animals in the known world of Kaimere, and in hindsight I can see how the project might perpetuate these notions that more modern animals are more sophisticated, competitive, or superior. The reality is that the portal harvests Earth animals whenever there's a loss of biodiversity in a region of its territory, so new animals taken from an analogous context often end up getting introduced and therefore thrive before native fauna have a chance to recover and adapt, and this has resulted in an artificial bias toward the success of increasingly modern Earth taxa. Further out beyond the territory of the portal, I'd like to think that things are more balanced and realistic, but I won't begrudge people who see this in the known world and are therefore turned off by the project. I like it because it means the known world has a lot of animals I can use in Earth languages for, helping to ease readers in by starting with a cast of mostly familiar animals and getting weirder as you go out. For a documentary, though, life on our planet succeeds in a lot of ways, and generally does a good job of broad strokes education, but its marketing in a lot of the first episode do a substantial disservice to the trends we actually see in evolution, and I don't think the later episodes properly recover from. I don't care if the animation is hit or miss, but this fundamental misinformation at the heart of the series does leave quite a lot to be desired. I wouldn't be surprised if life on our planet has further reach than other paleodocs and changes some opinions on such topics as the validity of feathered dinosaurs and even evolution itself. There's a lot of misinformation out there these days, and overall I think life on our planet will do good work. I just lament that there's a big ugly caveat I need to emphasize before I can honestly recommend this to folks. I did have fun, and I'm glad I watched it. Alright, well, no one's surprised I ran longer than I intended. I hope you all have enjoyed my musings. Gotta get back to work. Thank you so much for watching, and if you've seen life on our planet, share your thoughts in the comments. Have a wonderful day. Cheers, folks!